How many times do you come across a mixing tip that has the word almost or never in front of it? It seems like the case for maybe 90% of the mixing tips I see. Always make EQ cuts and never EQ boosts. Always put reverbs on buses and never on the track itself. Always put high shelf EQ on vocals. Put a high pass filter on every single track without fail. Now don't get me wrong, there is some good advice hiding in there. I do normally use reverbs on buses instead of the track itself. It gives you an easy wet dry control, it reduces processing power, it lets you add the same reverb easily across multiple tracks, but I don't always put reverbs on buses because sometimes that might not be the right thing for the mix. And specific EQ decisions as well, like putting a high shelf on all vocals. Sure, it's going to help brighten up your vocals, but maybe a bright vocal track isn't right for your particular mix. Or maybe the vocal's been recorded with a Rode NT1A and it's already super bright. My point is that mixing is an art form and there's no one size fits all. I was mixing a track for a band the other day and I slapped this reverb on the vocal track, this little intro vocal section. It was Waves One Knob Wetter, love that name. And it sounded great. It was a perfect reverb for that little part of the track. I messed around with a few others, but it sounded just right. So I thought, okay, I'm going to stick this on a bus now. Just because that's what I normally do and it's easier, and then maybe I'll want to use that same reverb on other tracks later in the mix. So I muted the reverb on the track itself, added it to a bus, and then I started fiddling around with the wet dry level and the level on the actual plugin itself to try and recreate what I just created before. And I thought to myself, wait, why am I doing this? Like, what is the actual functional reason? Because it was perfect before. And I'm just doing this because it's become habit and it's just what I do, but not necessarily because it's the right thing for my mix. So I deleted that bus, I activated it back on the vocal track, and it sounded perfect again. My point is that I got caught up in my process, the bias, the do's and don'ts of mixing, and it interrupted my creative process when it was running smoothly. Now this does apply to recording as well. I just find that it's more prominent with mixing, one, because almost every single song needs mixing, whereas technically not every song is recorded, and two, because of the digital nature of mixing now, it's easy to get caught up in specific values and presets and such. Now, I'm not saying there aren't a few things that you should always do or should never do. For example, you should always check your mixes on other speakers, but that's not a creative decision. That's just a smart thing to do. It gives you more information about your mix. It helps you to better understand what a listener might hear your mix as. It doesn't restrict your creativity though, whereas having certain rules on what EQ values you shouldn't use does restrict your creativity. Now, I recently put together a list of 20 mixing tips. I'll leave a link below. It is helpful for getting you better mixes. It's got a few new techniques and some things to help you improve your workflow, but very few of the tips I would call mandatory. And that's the difference. I'm not going to tell you that you must never ever use a fast attack on your snare drum, because what if on the track that you're mixing you want a soft transient? And you know what else I'm not going to tell you? That these are the only 20 mixing tips you'll ever need, and that if you just watch this one video or read this one guide, you'll be a mixing master. I've been mixing for 10 years. I studied it in college and uni, and I've still got tons to learn, and I've certainly picked up more than 14 mixing tips or whatever. When you get those guides where it says the only 5 mixing tips you'll ever need, it's clickbait. You never stop learning. Now, don't get me wrong, even if you've only been mixing for 6 months or a year or so, you could still be making awesome mixes, and I implore you to get your work out there, get it heard. Don't let the veterans put you off. Your music is still worth hearing, and the more you put out there, the more you'll improve. But don't forget that mixing music is an art. Fill your brain with as much information and knowledge and tips and techniques as you can over the years, and when the time comes, when it's right for that mix that you're working on, you'll have the knowledge there ready. There is no right and wrong in mixing. There's no super quick way of doing it. There are no 5 tips, the only 5 tips you'll ever need. There's no specific EQ value to use on every single instrument. It takes time. It is hard, but you will get there. Just pick up as much information as you can and try and stay away from the clickbait. Now leave a comment and let me know what you think. Is there a rule book to mixing, or do you just take your process as it comes, mix to mix? And if you want to see more, just hit subscribe and I'll see you next time.